Hello, everybody. Today we are going to talk POS. We're going to be talking about what to consider when choosing your taproom's point of sale system. But first, I'd like to introduce you to Kary Shumway. And Kary, that's a great hoodie you're wearing right now, by the way.
Well, thank you. My good friend Andrew Copeland sent it to me, and I wear it proudly. It's very comfortable.
I'm glad it's keeping you warm during this cold winter. But first, Kary, who are you? What do you do in the beer industry? And why are you here today?
Well, thank you, Andrew. So my name is Kary Shumway, and I run Craft Brewery Financial Training.com. It's an online resource for breweries, and I teach finance. It's funny, I was at a conference this week, and I was overhearing eavesdropping on a conversation next to me, and one of the brewery owners said, we're living now in an age where financial literacy is an absolutely critical skill. And I wanted to go over and give him a hug. I didn't, but that's what I do. I teach financial literacy. I basically show people how to set up your financials, how to do your budgeting, really how to use numbers to run a better brewery business. It's not always easy. It can get complicated. So my goal is to really simplify it and kind of give you actionable steps that you can take to improve whatever aspect of your finances you're looking to do for your business.
Love it. As you often say, numbers are fun, numbers are your friend, and your POS system can provide you a lot of numbers that can make your brewery more successful. So tell me first, Kary, why is it important, one, that a brewery have a POS?
Yeah, it's funny because I'm old enough to remember the cash registers. Like back in the day, you literally had the buttons and the drawer popped open and you had dollars. And some places still have those, but not very many. So I think of a POS system as really just like cash register on steroids, and it can do so many amazing things. But really we're trying to leverage the technology to do more than just take in cash and and reconcile it and make sure we're safeguarding the money that comes in. We want to track the performance for specific aspects of our taproom business. What's happening in different locations. We want to figure out what's selling the best, and then we can maybe refine our offerings accordingly. We want to be able to engage our customers and prospective customers with, say, loyalty rewards and promotional offers. And we'd also like to manage and control the expenses through our taproom, including employee productivity and the inventory and whatnot. So there's a lot of things the POS system can do. And what I find is, like most software systems, we kind of only use a fraction of it, right? We understand this part, we never really figured that part out. So I think a lot of these systems are probably just underutilized. It doesn't mean there's some are better than there are, or some are probably better than others, but I think what we'll talk about today is sort of the criteria that you can look at, irrespective of what system you end up choosing. Really just kind of what are the key questions you might want to ask and things you want to look for when you're trying to pick the right system for your business.
And we're going to dive into all that criteria shortly. But first, why, in your opinion, is it important that the brewery take the time to find the right POS?
Well, it's like any software. I've been through a lot of software conversions, whether it's accounting and finance software or a management software or an ERP system. And you're really putting a lot of time and effort and money into the process, right? So you really want to do some due diligence, do some homework, so that when you select that particular POS, you got a pretty good expectation of what you're going to get out of it. So these software is not just like, hey, let's get that software and whatnot. We got to train everybody on how to use it. So there's a lot of time, not just for the brewery owner, but for everybody involved. So it really is it's almost like an ounce of prevention. Do your homework, ask some key questions. You can really kind of make sure you're going to get what you're expecting to get. So it's really just about that, doing the homework to save you lots of. You can always change later, but boy, what a hassle. You really kind of want to do this process once if possible.
Awesome. Well, let's dive through the list. Now, first on the list of the criteria we're going to talk about today is reporting and analysis. Kary, what should a brewery owner, manager look for with regard to tracking results of different areas of the tap room with regard to their POS?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're looking for it to do a couple things. One is just basic reporting, and then another is really sort of these, what I would call value added analysis. So your basic reporting is you just want to know the critical information around the key drivers of your business. And to keep it simple, I tend to look at this as I need to know about the products that I'm selling and the customers that I'm selling to. So we just take these two buckets. And so for products, I want to know, well, what's selling, what's the volume look like, what's the velocity, how fast are these, if we're talking about, maybe you've got 8 tap handles up there, what's selling better than others. Sometimes we know, or we think we know. It's pretty remarkable in my experience. We think that's the best seller. And then in fact, we look at the data and we're like, oh boy, that's not even in the top 5. So really just the basics on products. So we got a good sense, a good data set on what's selling. I think it's also interesting to look at, the impact of maybe your product mix, or if you've got different beers. So for example, if you've got, let's just say 8 lines, and maybe your product mixes, I'd really like to have something for everybody, an IPA, a double IPA, a lager, maybe a darker ale, or this or that or the other. So you're really kind of giving variety. Okay, how's that working versus, what if we had, 3 or 4 IPAs on there? Are we incrementally increasing? So really kind of playing around, I think, with the portfolio. Then I think correlating other changes into your product offerings and then seeing what happens. So for example, we talk about samples a lot and flights a lot. So if you're offering samples, can you correlate the more samples you give to some sort of corresponding increase in sales of that particular product and the product's mix overall? So I think really getting sort of sophisticated in terms of what works there. Customers, I want to know who are these customers? What do they buy? How much do they buy? How often do they come back? These are the people that are more likely, once somebody comes in, they're more likely to come back. So I want my system to be able to easily aggregate and hold that information, and then so that I can use it to reach out to our fans to come back. We also, we like dashboards and KPI stuff that makes it easy. So I don't want to do a lot of calculating. The prettier, the better, but I wouldn't fall in love with a dashboard just because it's pretty. I want to make sure we're really monitoring those key numbers around products and customers first. And then we want ease of use and flexibility of use. People that are going to be using this, the staff, do we have the ability for not just counter service, but table service or QR codes where customers can order their own? A lot of these are pretty basic now, but these are questions you want to ask and not take it for granted that, oh yeah, they must do that. Some of these might not have quite either have that fully baked, or it doesn't work great, or there may be some issues with those. So that's kind of how I would think about the reporting and analysis side of the equation.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing all that. And Kary, you and I both love data, and both you and I love providing actionable strategies. So question for you on this, on the analysis and the reporting, is there a question that we might forget or might not think of that you think brewery owners should ask potential POS systems when going through this process with regard to the reporting and analysis?
Yeah, I would say, I don't know about forget. I think if you focus on those areas of products and customers, I would say more look at introspectively, look in the mirror. What is it that you want out of it? I think that's a running theme throughout this is, what exactly are you hoping to get? So I would probably frame the questions more so around, I don't want to forget to ask about this or this because this is important to me. So for example, we're talking about, we want to understand the different maybe aspects of your tap room. So maybe I've got outside space, I've got event space, I've got insights. Maybe I'd want to know, like, what are the relative sales for each of those locations? Can I track them separately? Like, how would I know? Like, maybe I have the opportunity to actually add outside space or expand on it. I'd like to know, does that increase, how is that going to help the overall sales for the business? So maybe that's a question, but you've got to kind of look at, what is it that you're trying to get from the point of sale system that you're not getting already? Because a lot of folks are you're generally going to fall into one of two categories, right? You don't have a point of sale system and you're researching it. And in that case, you're maybe startup or planning phase, or you do have one and you think it stinks or you don't like it and you want to change to something else. So in that second category, you probably already know what you want. So I would just make sure, don't forget to ask those questions, be purposeful about the questions that you're asking, again, so that if you go with a particular POS, you're gonna get what you hope to get.
I think a lot of what you just hinted at and said was that you need to make sure the potential POS company you're going to work with understands your business model. I think that's so important that they understand who you are and your needs.
Well said. Yep.
Absolutely. Now, the next thing we want to talk about today Give me a little insight on the fees and pricing, equipment, software. You see all these packages listed, but what should potential customers be looking for in their POS?
Yeah, I think as it relates to fees, it's just educating yourself about all the different components. You can get feed to death in some cases. Others are maybe a more simpler fee model, but you really just break it into those categories of, what are the fees for, say, installation and setup? Maybe it's zero, maybe it's significant. What are the costs for equipment? Like, what do I have to buy? Am I going to have to wire stuff up, or is this, easy enough? What type of hardware are we going to have to buy? Who's supporting that? Like, how often am I going to have to replace it? Things do break. Software fees. So these ongoing SaaS fees, what does that look like? Processing fees, if they exist. So a lot of these will be driven by transactions, a certain amount per transaction. Then there's the usual credit card fees. And the obvious question on credit card fees or merchant fees is, can you shop for your own payment provider, i.e., can you disconnect it from the point of sale system? Or is it kind of baked in? No. Our system, you have to use this payment processor. We don't. So that's just good to know. And then, what are the fees? How does that work? Is it on a, and then you can do a little grid on this and just kind of grab each of these components. And as I do, maybe create a spreadsheet. So
you beat me to it.
You kind of compare, but it helps because it's like, there's a lot to keep track of. And I'm not sure this would be part of your research. Let's just say you're looking at, 2 or 3 different systems. You want to know what it's going to cost, right? And you want to know what the variable and the fixed fees are. So fixed fees might be your installation and equipment. Your variable fees might be software processing and credit card. And I want to know, like, if I'm doing a certain volume, is this provider going to be, POS provider going to be better than another? So yeah, I love the spreadsheet, and you know that.
Well, I think you might need to now create like a choose your own POS calculator to figure out, which one may be right for you based off your model.
And I have one of those because, we were doing this process, and so I'd be happy to, however it may happen, I can share that with the people. Would love to do that.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that offer, Kary. Next up, let's talk about selling tools. And, a few years ago, we probably weren't mentioning like e-commerce integrations, loyalty programs, rewards, promos. But what should someone look for with regard to all of the above?
I think the first and most obvious is just to ask about it and ask what the functionality is. E-commerce, it's almost table stakes as well. Like, we've got to have an e-commerce integration. But I would ask, what does it look like? Does that type of interface connect with your existing website? How does that work? Maybe walk through it. Maybe show me the customer experience. Like, if I go with your POS system, show me an example of where and how this integrates with my website. And what else do I get? Are there, e-commerce is all about, I'm going online. I want to know what I'm going to buy. So, what do we have? Online menus. I like to have pretty pictures. Pretty pictures of beer is awesome. Descriptions, pricing. So I want to know all that stuff to make an informed decision. So what does the POS provider do that, or do I have to do? Who does all that stuff? So do they have it? Is the functionality good? And then it's kind of the basics of, how easy is it for the customer to buy from us? We could talk about this concept of frictionless buying. So if I go to your website, I click, okay, it's easy for me to know immediately, can I buy something online, whether it's merchandise, beer, food, how can I do it? So I want to make that really obvious, number one, really easy. And, I think the reality is, and I don't have the case studies on this, just my own anecdotal evidence, is most brewery sites don't have that. You go there like, do they have beer? Yes or no? I scroll around. Oh, maybe they do. So that's not necessarily the POS provider's job to do. That's more on you and your marketing team, but the POS should have the capability to easily integrate and provide all those kind of nice things that make it easier for your customer to buy from you and hopefully buy a lot.
And that's a great segue to what I want to talk about next, integrations. We hear the term taproom technology so much. In addition to POSs, there's so many other types of technologies that, you can use to make the taproom and brewery experience more profitable, more efficient. So what should someone look for when they're looking for integrations with things like brewery management software, accounting software, inventory management features? What should someone be looking for with regards to their POS, with regards to these potential integrations to other parts of the brewery?
Yeah, the thing with software is, we generally don't have one piece of software that can do everything, right? We have software for the tap room, we have software for your accounting, we have software for your production brewery. Maybe there's one for this, that, and the other. At the end of the day, you got like 4 or 5 softwares out there, and they don't always play well together. They don't always talk to each other, and I don't think it's 100% critical. I mean, if you got these individual softwares that do what they're supposed to do really well, but they don't necessarily work with, let's say, your accounting. It's not the end of the world, but it's just something to be aware of. So I would say that when you're talking to different POS providers, just ask them, who do you integrate with? Do you integrate with, I'm going to say QuickBooks only because that's sort of the de facto standard out there. I'd really like it to interface with my accounting. I want all these transactions coming from the POS to just kind of flow over to the right categories in my accounting system, so I don't have to re-enter everything. So I want to know, is it seamless? What tools are there to do like my checks and balances to make sure that the systems are in sync? I want to make sure the numbers are the same. So if my POS system says you did X amount in sales, I want that to go over to my accounting system and not have there be a difference. If there is a difference, I want to know what's the process by which I can figure that out. Because the alternative, if it doesn't sync, if it doesn't talk to each other, that manual process can be really time consuming. You got to run a report out of your point of sale system, and then somebody's got to enter it into your accounting system. And not only is that a pain, but you can cause errors as manual processes do. Then it takes more time to fix them. Very often, because it takes so long, there's a delay or a time lag to get the process done. And as a result, things are going to back up and our numbers aren't necessarily up to date in our accounting system. So,
and as we know, taproom managers and owners, they wear lots of different hats. So making this as easy and efficient as possible is probably something that many are looking for.
Absolutely. Nobody really wants to spend an extra 20 minutes a day or what, an hour, a couple hours a week. Just in some cases, just not going to do it. So then your numbers are off and, eventually that'll become a problem. So that's really the question, does it sync? And, you'd asked about inventory management. I think this is interesting to me. Like, so there's so much, many tap rooms that carry merchandise have so many different types, right? We got shirts and sweatshirts and I don't know, some gear like this, hats.
Not for sale, but still just as awesome.
Not available in stores. So there's a lot to keep track of, and I've got my own horror stories, and I imagine some folks, listening now or watching later might as well. But it's kind of hard to keep track of, what do you have? What is, for inventorying it, what do we have for merch? The system says we've got this, do we really have it? We do it. No, actually, it's weird. It's not here. We don't have it. So inventory is usually wrong unless we have good systems and procedures to keep track of it. So if the POS system can help us with that, it can do a couple things. It's like we can make sure we really have what the system says we have. So we do some good inventory counts. But it can also help us with ordering quantities. What's actually selling? What do we actually have on hand? What do we actually need to order? One of the problems that hurts cash flow amongst customer service as well is if we have too much or too little of certain types of merchandise. We've got like tons of triple extra large t-shirts and we have none of the large that everybody needs to buy. So really a way to leverage your POS system and the data that it contains, all that sales history and the inventory history, so that it can help inform your ordering process so that you have what the customer wants and they can actually buy it. And then also so you're not carrying too much of any merchandise inventory, because obviously that happens a lot too. Sometimes you just don't know what's going to sell, and that's going to have you bringing on new shirts or styles or this or that, new products, new merch. That's going to happen. But if you get a pre-established pattern, hopefully your POS can provide that data to help you order more efficiently.
Now, Kary, we've talked a lot so far about data and the technology side of things, but what about service and support? Where does that fall on the level of importance when choosing a POS system?
Service and support. You might argue that this, even though it's the last topic we're going to talk about, or maybe near the last, it's also perhaps the most important, because this is when something goes wrong, who's going to be there to answer the phone? So I think it's always tricky to figure this out, and sometimes you figure it out when it's too late. But I'd say first is just ask some basic questions around their service and support model, right? So as if I've got an issue, who do I call? When are you staffed? What are the days? What are the hours? How many reps? This is an interesting one, I think, is, how many reps do you have that are dedicated to service and support? And maybe what's the ratio between how many reps you have and how many clients you have? And what systems do they maybe have in place to ensure great customer service? Do they keep any stats on that? A lot of people like average hold times or whatever. They may or may not share that information, but I think it's interesting to know, oh yeah, our service is great. You'll be, okay, well, how many people do you have and how many breweries do you have? And you can make your own decision like, wow, you've got, X number of reps and 500 X customers, maybe not, but, I think just asking those questions around it. I'd also be curious if they do internal customer service reviews and what that might look like. So if they're asking their customers, everyone does these employer satisfaction reports, right? So for your customers, what does that look like? What are the common complaints? What are the issues that tend to pop up? It may be tricky to get this stuff because nobody necessarily wants to self-report that they're having problems, that they have issues, but I think everybody has problems. So it's like, all right, yep, this was a problem. That's a problem. Here's what we've done to address it. You can always ask around others that are using a particular POS that you're looking at, what's their experience. You can ask for references for sure. Like, hey, most places will say, yeah, talk to so-and-so and so-and-so, but we know those are sort of self-selected, and you're probably not going to hear the horror stories, and if there are any. So maybe it really comes down to your due diligence. I think another is, we always say it, you got to get it in writing. I want to know what the service standards are, and I'd like to see it in writing. So what exactly is the expectation? Again, hours, days of availability. Maybe talk through some what ifs. What if the system goes down, on a Saturday night when its place is packed, and we just can't figure this thing out. Who do you call? Who answers the phone? Are you staffed at that point? So maybe think about, and the other thing is, if you've had POS system issues, you can ask those questions too. Hey, this happened. How do you handle a situation like that? So you can't account for every possible problem, but it might be useful to ask, what types of issues has your POS provider that you're looking at had in the past, and what have they done to resolve that? So you can kind of get a sense as to what you might expect relative to the service levels.
That's great, Kary. And thus far, we talked a lot about the things to consider. And I hope anyone listening at this point has a long list of notes of things that are important to your brewery. That way, when you're having these phone calls, they're a little more efficient. That way, you can get to the right solution a little bit quicker. But I think so often, Kary, we hear like the phrase like death by demo. How can potential, POS customers, avoid that? And what can they do to make the process a little bit smoother when selecting the right POS?
Death by demo. It's true.
Death by demo.
If anyone's listening that has been through a lot of demos, you know what that means. I used to love demos because I'm like, oh yeah, I want to learn about this. And then I realized, boy, this hurts a lot because you got to go through these demos and it takes a long time. And there's a lot of you're being pitched this and that. And maybe you realize halfway through, this isn't the right system for me. And now you're stuck and, you're like, I got to listen to the rest of this thing. And so I definitely recommend at least thinking about, using some sort of an RFP, request for proposal, so that you're really kind of weeding out any POS providers that just simply aren't going to meet your needs. So, for example, of the things that we've talked about, you might want to take those and figure out what's most important to you and send them off to the prospective POS vendor in advance and require them to answer. So you kind of want to stick to the ones that are going to be most critical for your decision making. So for example, if it's really important to you to have a POS provider that allows you to shop around for your own credit card, for your own merchant payment processor, then you want to know that up front. So maybe that's a question, can I, shop for my own merchant provider? If pricing is going to be, I want to know what your pricing is. And here's a format. Here's a fancy spreadsheet you can use that I want to know what your pricing is. Put it in this format so that I can compare apples to apples to other POS companies that I'm looking at. Maybe integration with your brewery software or your accounting software is just really important because or maybe you've had issues with the system's not talking to each other. So that's a very specific question. I use XYZ brewery software. Do you integrate with it? Is it seamless? How would I know? Are there checks and balances relative to that? So really what you're doing is you're trying to sort of front run the questions that you might ask in a demo anyhow. And you don't need to ask those questions. You should be able to get that information prior to. So you don't have to sit through the long demo only to find out that, I don't know, for example, their e-commerce is in beta testing, right? Like, oh boy, that was kind of important to us, but they've had some issues with it, or whatever's important. So I would say take those list of questions, identify what's most important to you, send it off in that RFP format, which really just means in order for me as the brewery taproom to consider your point of sale system, I need you to fill this thing out. And you don't want to be onerous with it, maybe 3 to 5 questions, whether it's pricing, e-commerce. But it can be helpful to say, these are really non-starters for me. I need this, 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 and this. And do you have them? And make them really demonstrate that to you. So I think it's a way to weed out the point of sale providers that just simply aren't going to work for you. Allow you a nice apples to apples comparison of the ones that will work for you. So you can see pricing and very quickly kind of maybe on one grid. And a lot of bigger companies will do this request for proposal. It's not like you're coming out of left field with this. And, folks are probably familiar with, seeing these in some form or another in business. But you're really just trying to say, I don't want to waste my time. I don't want to waste your time, as a POS company. I don't want to waste my time as a taproom manager or owner. Let's cut to the chase and get some answers to these questions. And it can be tricky because I have tried this and some people are like, well, no, let's jump on a call. Let's just do it. I'm like, no, I want you to fill this thing out first and then we'll jump on a call. So once you've established the basics, okay, I think this is going to do what I want. Now let me do the demo because now I'm excited. I know you're going to check all the boxes I want. Now it's just, let me see the functionality. Let me see what these reports look like. Let me talk to you as the person who's giving me this demo. Do you know what you're talking about? Are you able to give me some value add that I hadn't considered? So all of those things can come into play once you've established, this meets or seems to meet my criteria. So I think that request for proposal could be a nice way to kind of save you some time.
I agree. Now, talking about time, Kary, how long should this process take? How long should someone expect to spend finding the right POS?
I think it's real. It's interesting because it's always it's almost like a personal question. Like it comes down to how important is this particular project to you, right? To select one. Do you have the discipline to set a deadline on it? Because you're typically not going to be waiting for, boy, that POS provider never called me back. They're probably going to call you like right now. They're ready to rock and roll. It's not going to be on them. So I think the process, really just kind of set a deadline. I mean, if you're sitting there and you're thinking, my POS system now is, it's okay. It's not great. We've been sort of having these workarounds. I really feel like but we've got all these other fires burning. Yeah, maybe not right now. But I think when you can dedicate the time. So I think start to finish, it's a couple of weeks. I don't see why it wouldn't be. Because, you've got the tools to ask the right questions. You can put that information. So if you use a request for proposal, and it doesn't have to be anything formal. It could be literally an email. Hey, here are my questions. Send me an email back. It's pretty straightforward. And then you've got 3 different POS providers you're looking at. I really need this back by Friday. It's Wednesday. I don't think that's unreasonable. Not asking crazy questions here. I want to know your pricing and this and that. Pull that together. Do your analysis. I like this one and this one. Set up your demos for middle of the following week. Include the people who should be included. You may want to do a couple of reference checks. You may want to ask, some of your contemporaries that might be using the same system. So that might take a little time. But I think if you're dedicated to the task, I don't see why it couldn't be a 2 or 3 week process. Now, if you're like there's really no hurry. If you're kicking the tires and you're exploratory, take all the time you want. If you're brewery and planning, you've got so many things you need to think about. This could be more, I just want to kind of dip my toe in and understand what might be going on. Yeah, that's fine. There's no rush. Then you can kind of just go at your own pace. But I think there's not that many choices and there's not that many criteria. There's enough that it's important to do your due diligence, but it's not something that should take months and months. I think we're talking weeks and weeks.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing all that, Kary. You've done a great job of walking through the process. Well, everyone listening today, they've gone through the process. They've found the right POS system. Once you've found that right point of sale system partner, Kary, what can a brewery expect from that relationship? How will they see greater success from having the right partner?
Yeah, I think it's always about, so whenever you're buying software, you're really buying the people behind it, right? You're buying that sales and support and value added component. So I think there's at least three things to think about. One is, does this software meet my needs? And that's what we've kind of covered today. These are the criteria that I'm looking for. It meets it or doesn't. It meets it. Good. Okay. Do I like sales support? I do. Now I might even ask them too, what sort of value added services do you provide outside of, hey, if this thing breaks, who do I call? If I need, so I want to, and if I need training, who do I call? Those are important. But how about who's going to show me how to use this system to the best of its ability so that I can actually achieve my goals for the tap room, right? I think that's a really interesting thing to think about. And they might say, oh yeah, no, we'll jump on a call and we'll be happy to do that. Or, well, we don't do that. So I would say once you get it, continue that relationship, because you're buying more than the equipment and the software. You're really buying the intelligence of the people that are behind it. And those people that have had experience with it, which, hopefully the folks selling it have that, should be able to point you in those directions and kind of give you that, the benefit of their knowledge so that you can use the tool to really drive your performance. Because that's the name of the game is, you want to collect the money, you want to have everything accounted for, but you want to use the intelligence of the system and the people behind it.
Awesome. Yeah, your POS system can be your best friend. Well, Kary, as we wind down, is there anything else you'd like to add? Or if anybody has any specific POS questions, how can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, be happy to answer any questions. The easiest way to get me is Kary at beerbusinessfinance.com. That's Kary at beerbusinessfinance.com. Love talking software. Love, I've done this a bunch of times, and happy to help in any way I can. So hopefully there was some takeaways there for folks to kind of frame up the process. But I think at the end of the day, it's really, you just do your homework. You set some deadlines on when you want to be done. You ask the POS providers to do a little work in advance of the demo, so everybody saves time. And then once you get that thing installed, it's really, now it's a really team effort. You got to train your people properly. You got to take the time to understand what this system can actually do. You got to execute on it and then leverage, the team behind the software, because that's what they should be there for.
Awesome. And once you have that right POS, you're going to see greater taproom success.
Rock and roll.
Awesome. Well, Kary, thank you so much for your insight today. Appreciate you having, and anyone feel free to reach out to Kary with any questions. We'll see you soon. Cheers, everybody.